My name is Sandy Adamitis, the social media director for the Page International Screenwriting Awards, and your host for the Writers Hangout, a podcast that celebrates the many stages of writing, from inspiration to the first draft, revising, getting a project made, and everything in between. We'll talk to the best and the brightest in the entertainment industry and create a space where you can hang out, learn from the pros, and have fun. Hey writers, it's Sandy, and welcome to part 2 of our terrific interview with John, Wirth and Gail Matthius, a Hollywood couple who met in high school, fell in love, moved to Hollywood to pursue their dreams, and got married. Gail was a cast member on Saturday Night Live in 1981 and is known for her voice acting work in animated shows, including Bobby's World, Tiny Toon Adventures, Animaniacs, and The Tick. John Wirth is a television showrunner, producer, and writer. His credits include Hell on Wheels, Woo Assassins, and NASH Bridges. In part 1, we got to know Gail and John as we discussed the early days and their willingness to work hard to succeed. In this episode, we'll focus on the difference between when Gail and John were struggling versus today in 2023, when unfortunately, actors and writers have to strike for decent wages and protection from artificial intelligence. Let's get into it. What are some of the most significant changes in the film and television business you feel work for and against creatives today?
Too many networks. I think I might have to defer to you on that.
Terry, you were asking about LA and our impressions of LA at the time. You know, that was 50 some years ago. Almost.
It was smoggier.
It was smoggier.
Yes. It was a lot smoggier.
It was smoggier,
no computers,
but it was
no internet.
No, but it was considerably smaller and quainter. Westwood Village was a very quaint place. Beverly Center, Melrose, that whole corridor in there, 3rd Street, none of that existed. Hollywood was a complete moribund at the time. Nobody was living there.
Right. Hollywood, absolutely. You would never go there.
No, never go there.
Danger, Will Robinson.
Yes.
There was traffic, but you could get places. You could realistically expect to drive over Laurel Canyon and get to Radford.
There were pockets.
Yeah.
You could slip into the pockets when there wasn't traffic. Yeah. Now it's just traffic.
It's just traffic all the time.
You need a lot more money.
I don't really have anything very good to report, unfortunately. I'm just being honest. I told you that we lived in an apartment that was $575 a month, 1,500 square feet, 3 bedrooms, 3 of us living in there, dividing that rent by 3.
Exactly.
I don't know what the equivalent is of
Kids
that
are looking
today.
at $2,500 for a 1-bedroom in the Valley.
Yeah. You know, I had a 1978 Honda Accord, which I bought for $5,000 new. My big thing was I was just trying to dodge the college debt collectors because they were trying to get my college loans out of me. But today, this happened since the streamers have kind of come into play. And certainly during the coronavirus, there's been this proliferation of development of programs. John Landgraf will tell you that there's way too many television shows. The business can't sustain it, and I believe he's right.
What's happening now is the young people have said, we can do it ourselves.
There is, I feel, a balance. You can get your work to people like maybe not before. You had to have the connection at the baseball game. Now there's screenwriting competitions, or there's
social media, YouTube.
You can get a TV show now off of Twitter. So I'm not saying that's better or worse than what you guys first encountered, but I think we have to be honest with the writers out there. It is more difficult now to start a career. You used to just get to LA, start networking.
Doors were open. You could walk in. There wasn't security. You could literally walk in and go,
I used to sneak on the studio lots all the time.
There you go. Right.
But here's the difference. I mean, there are a lot of differences, but then if you wanted to work in the television business, you had to be here.
Yes.
That's not entirely true today.
Which is not a bad thing.
Live here. You had to live here.
Yeah. I had a writer's room this year that was remote, and only one person in that writer's room lived in Los Angeles. One
You
writer
zoomed
lived in
in.
Oklahoma
Yes,
City.
everybody.
One writer lived in Minneapolis. One writer lived in Phoenix. They lived all over the place. Santa Fe. And yes, you can create a YouTube channel, but you're not going to have the career that I had. I used to think it was available to anybody who came up through the television business in the same way that I did. Now that path has been chopped up, masticated, and spit out by the business and the way these streamers and these tech companies have come in and changed the business. When I started working on Remington Steele, for example, we made 22 to 24 episodes a season. The job was 40 weeks or sometimes 46. And 22 episodes. We were barely ahead of production. We made the show while it was airing, and they would put 22 episodes on a year, and then they'd rerun them. And so for 44 weeks, your show was on television.
So you had the minds and the eyeballs.
So you were in the
40,
zeitgeist.
yeah.
Believe me, everybody knew who Remington Steele was.
And it was not a crowded field of television shows.
Right.
Relatively speaking.
Personally, I'm amazed at how shows will take you off the air now for a year or two. I'm sorry, I lose interest. I will be in love with a show. And if they take it off for a year,
You break up with it.
you break up with it.
When I was at Netflix, the calendar that they had put together, first of all, it took close to 2 years to make 10 episodes and to get those 10 episodes to the platform. And then the way people view those shows is it dropped at midnight on a Thursday, and Netflix told me by Monday at midnight, 90% of the people that were going to watch the show had watched it. Wow. And they also put out 100 original series within the 2-week time span that my show dropped. So how do you get eyeballs or any attention?
Right.
And then they had a 3-month window to decide if they wanted to pick the show up. So 90 days were going to go by no matter what. And then if they picked your show up in 90 days, then they had an 8-month writing and prep schedule, and then a 6-month shooting schedule, and then a 6-month post schedule. So you were looking at 2 years.
Yeah.
I don't understand the model when I say that they took a thing that was working and they destroyed it, and now they're trying to,
Reconfigure.
when I see Netflix is selling subscriptions for cheaper if you will allow them to put commercials on it, I'm thinking, well, you destroyed the business and now you're turning yourself into the business that you destroyed, which is silly. But for writers, for young writers, there are other ways to be creative and to make a TV show that it's just not the traditional way that it had been done for 50 or 60 or 70 years.
And that's nothing to say that has to stay that way. I mean, it's always what happens. Things
Everything
evolve
is
and
evolving.
changes.
Yeah, things are evolving all the time.
It would all be fine if they kept up with paying the writers and the actors.
Well,
there's a lot of new entities.
Correct.
But then they're squeezing the hell out of the creatives.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what is happening now, instead of the reason I was talking about 40-week work schedule for a TV show back in the day, now the companies will say to me, we want you to hire some writers. Don't hire more than 5. And it's a 10-week writer's room. And you'll say, well, what am I doing in the 10 weeks? 6 scripts, because we're going to go into prep after that. And well, it's not possible to do it in 10 weeks. Well, you have the option to expand it to 14 weeks, to which I always say, okay, I have a 14-week writer's room. And
poof, there's the expansion.
And then after the 14 weeks, they take everybody's parking space away from them. And now they've gotten to the point where after the coronavirus and people were forced to work on a TV show remotely, and some people like it, and most people that I talk to say it's okay, but it's not the same as being in a writer's room. I have talked to people who say, I'm never going back to a writer's room. It's great. I just walk in my boxer shorts and I sit down and I'm at the room.
And I fool everybody.
But
I think it's the people who have careers benefit from virtual. It's the young people who need to get in there and connect with the other writers and look in the eye and go to lunch and say, look at my script. And
hang out. Can you give me notes?
Yeah. And the companies are now taking the position that, well, your show last season cost X amount, and you're telling me this season, the show for the writers in the writer's room, and you're telling me this season it's going to be twice that. And that doesn't have to do with writers making more money. That has to do with
being in person.
Well, I need a room. You got to rent the room. Everything we went through on the show last year, where we found that space, we had people set up to come in and be, PAs and writer's assistants and insurance and parking and all that is very expensive.
And lunch.
And they don't want to bear the cost of that.
I don't see the networks and studios ever going back. The writers are, going to have to push for
jam
that.
it. And by the way, I've had writers say to me, are we going to be in person or remote? And I will say in person. And then they kind of shrink and say, well, what part of town is it going to be in? And when I say West Side, they shrink even further and are asking themselves, is it worth it for me to get in my car and drive over there?
Understood. Yeah. I mean, newer writers don't ever do that.
Yeah.
But yeah, if you are spending an hour and a half
It's
to just drive to the office.
It's a consideration.
Yeah.
We
and
did
traffic.
NASH Bridges
Yep.
for 6 years, 6 seasons, and it was a minimum 1 hour
We lived here.
plus drive from here to that office in
And the thing was, you were
Warner
the
Brothers.
only person suffering that commute.
Yeah.
It was just poor John.
Yeah.
It was just
And so it was a minimum of an hour and sometimes 2 hours. And if it rained, it could be more. And it's just the way it was, And so I
got
honestly,
to where you started waiting to drive home because if you left at 7 and you're in the car for 2 hours, why not leave at 8 and you're still
exactly. You just stay at the office and you would write until the traffic
I'm not
went
very
down.
sympathetic to writers who don't want to drive because I did it all those years. Buck up, go where the job is, do the job, and get it done.
Be ready to hustle. How about residuals? What were residuals like for both of you back in the day compared to now? Because residuals are a huge point of contention for SAG and WGA.
It was always fun to get them.
So you're in favor of it.
I'm in favor. Yeah, especially when I had my voiceover, my cartoon. God, it was just great because you just get them in one lump sum, and it looked like a lot of money.
But we have been so extraordinarily lucky in our careers, and we've had a lot of jobs, and it's been a long time, 40 years, so we have a lot of work out there. And for many years, those residuals were coming through very regularly. Long after the show was done, NASH Bridges, they sold it to USA Channel, I think, for $1.5 million an episode to rerun for
Perpetuity?
No, for 3 airings. And our Writers Guild deal at the time was 1% of the sale per episode, which was $15,000, as I recall.
Get out of town.
Yeah, so
I didn't know that.
that show paid $45,000 an episode for just that USA syndication sale. And that was just one sale. And then if it sold in France, you would get residual in France. If it sold in Britain, you'd get the, foreign residuals.
Now there's just buyouts.
And so that was very helpful when you weren't working. When I made this deal at Netflix, they said no residuals. We have no idea what the value of your show is going to be. So we are going to give you a lump sum money up front, and that buys you out in perpetuity no matter what. And it seemed kind of good at the time if you weren't really thinking about it, because you thought, oh, lump sum, that's a lot of money. I'm going to take it. But you don't realize
they must be making
which I realize now, because that was 4 years ago or maybe 5 years ago, and I can go on Netflix right now and I can go to that show and I can watch that show, and so can anybody else in the world. And it's 5 years later and I'm getting nothing, and neither is anybody else. Not actors, not writers, nobody is making anything off of that show. That is a part of the business that has changed. And again, these these short order series. I mean, I have my name, I think, on 39 episodes of NASH Bridges. And that was a powerful group of shows to have in the world to collect residuals off of. Now, you may not even get a script, or you may not get a whole script. And there's just no ability to create, even if you work for 5 years. In this economy, you might have made 40 shows in 5 years if you were working every year. In my world, if I work for 5 years, I was making 150 shows. You know, it's a completely different business, and it's kind of become a gig economy, which is a shame.
Yes.
I'm of the belief that you can't go back. You can't recapture what it is, and the Writers Guild now is trying to legislate certain things about the business.
It'll probably be some kind of hybrid of what was. And
I agree. There are currently 3 networks, possibly 4 if you include Fox, that still make 22 episodes a year of their procedural shows, and sometimes more. And some of those shows last forever. I look at CBS now. I spent 15 years of my life working and making TV shows for them. And it is a bit of a factory, but they understand who their audience is, and they're delivering for their audience what their audience wants to see. And it's a very, very lucrative business for everybody involved. I know guys that are over there doing those shows, and they're making a lot of money. Sorry, Cheech.
Droning?
Am I droning? Sorry, guys. Don't drone.
No droning.
Just put it on 1.5 times speed, so I'm not droning so much. But I got serious for a minute because, we got serious.
Well, let's make it even more uncomfortable and talk about AI. What's your take on AI? What place can it have in what goes on? Or does it have to be gotten
Killed?
rid of? Yeah.
Like the Terminator?
Yeah.
I don't think you can kill it. I think it's here to stay. It's going to grow. It's going to get perfected. It's going to perfect itself, I
know my voiceover people are very concerned about it. I had a friend that I do improvisation with, even to this day, and she sent out this thing. Look at the bottom of that contract. It was in there. She was doing some voiceover thing. It was already in there, and we have the right to recreate your voice if we so some teeny tiny printing thing. And she caught it and said, "This is happening. It's happening."
Oh my goodness.
I don't know how they're going to address the AI thing because both sides have adopted that as their existential issue. I believe it's possible to create television scripts through AI. And I believe if you were being cost conscious, not to pick on the Dick Wolf empire, but there are thousands of episodes there. The shows are essentially kind of the same in terms of how they're set up and how the stories work. Ripped from the headlines sort of thing. So you input all those thousands and thousands of things into your AI machine. And then you say, give me an episode with Terry and Sandy, and they go to a school convention in Chicago, and one of them goes missing. And boom, you got a script like in 3 seconds. And then you hire one writer and you say, go through this and declunk and just kind of fix it. And you don't need a showrunner. I believe some part of the business is going to go that way. When I'm on an airplane and I see kids watching things on their cell phones and they've got it on 1.5 times the speed. I'm thinking...
Because they want to get through it faster.
I'm thinking of
it
all
makes
the
my eyes
hours...
squint and my mouth goes sideways.
Yeah, I think of all the hours I spend looking at the frames, trying to get the frames right, going to editing. The guys that do VFX and getting them to,
color correct,
paint something.
And then the kids do it 1.5 times faster.
And then
why bother?
They don't care. I care, but a lot of the younger viewers are consuming what we do in a different way, and okay for them is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
To a certain degree.
Good enough.
Yeah, it's good enough to a certain degree. I'm hoping there's always an appetite for the higher brow sort of stuff.
It could be like 3D. We'll have a bunch of 3D Jaws. We'll have AI Jaws, and then maybe it falls out of fashion.
If you could look at the music business, you'll notice that CDs are now being collected at a much greater rate than since 2000. Yeah. And so my suggestion is that everything you've done about quality counts huge, because on some point, instead of just plowing through something quickly, they'll say, I need to see this in all of its beauty. So it's not a waste, but I really think you're talking about the acceleration of input for this particular generation, and I don't think it's going to last. That's my one little take on it. Mm-hmm. I see them acting like we did when we loved records. We just had to have it. We had to see the artwork. We had to listen to it till we had to buy another one because we wore it out. That's just human beings reacting to art.
Yeah.
So you're not wasting your time.
Yeah, and before all of our time here, the Hollywood movie business was the only game in town. They made movies, they put them in theaters. If you wanted to see something, you had to go to a theater and sit with, 400 other people and consume it on the big screen. And then television came in, and one of the very early actor strike was all about how are actors going to get paid when their movies are broadcast on a television. There was a great deal of fear that television would put the movie business out of business.
Right.
Well, it hasn't. I mean, it impacted it. There was a while there during the last golden age of television where movies were these sort of big extravaganza things, Marvel stuff, and you couldn't really see any stories about people in the movies. You could just see these big extravaganzas. And they're fun. They're fun to go see. I want to see that stuff. But when I want to see a story about a Navajo cop working on the Navajo reservation, I have to watch it on TV. And the two things work together. And I'm hoping that as AI comes into the business and settles in the business, it has a place, but it doesn't replace.
I think that is the best outcome we can hope for. John and Gail, what is the key to maintaining a solid and lasting relationship when both of you work in Hollywood?
Therapy.
Plenty of it.
Having two houses.
But in all seriousness, I think being willing to let the other person have their time, have their experience, have their emotional breakdown, and just allowing a marriage like that. And somebody's kind of the star for a while, and the other person is kind of doing.
How many people were you married to during that time? Who are these other people you're speaking about?
I'm making it up as I'm saying it, so.
I think that's lovely. And I completely agree. Let your partner be in the spotlight, and then hopefully that partner supports you when you're in the spotlight. I like that a lot. I think that's lovely. J-Dub?
I remember coming home on hiatus because TV jobs are really intense and all-consuming, and they take a lot of hours.
I know what you're going to say.
And I would come home on hiatus, and I would know that I had 4 weeks, and I'm here now. So let's go to Hawaii. I'm here now. Let's go snowboarding. And I used to agitate a lot in this family when I was home on hiatus. And one time, Gail, we were right downstairs from where we're sitting right now. We were out there on the patio. And she goes, dude, I'm just going to tell you something. I go, okay. She goes, we don't work for you. I'm like, wait a minute, what?
I know.
And she goes, we are not going to Hawaii now. We're not going snowboarding. We have our own lives. They go on when you're not here. Get a clue. We don't work for you. She turns around and leaves, and I was like, well, I'm going to get a wife and family who do work for me. Because this is not working out. Sandy, get me a new wife and some kids who'll work for me.
In Hawaii.
Yeah.
Preferably.
Yeah.
Preferably.
Just in the last week or so, you're kind of flying high right now, and everything's going really well for you. And there was just a few things that were going on in my life, and you very nicely said, you need some wins. I'm having all the wins right now.
Yeah.
W-I-N-S, not wind.
Yeah.
Wins. And I was really touched by that.
This is perfect from where we are in the discussion, and it's, what do you think is the most unexpected thing that you've learned about each other over the years in careers that were really extraordinary and thinkable?
I'll go first because I know what it is. I have learned over the years through various things that have happened for Gail and to Gail how tough she is. She is tough. And, tougher than I am in many ways, and can push through and survive things that would defeat me quickly. And I have a lot of respect for you, Gigi. I made a joke out of it because I was getting too serious there for a second. But honestly, that's what kind of struck me about you. You hang in there and you stick, to the point of annoyance sometimes. But yeah, it's a good quality. And my guitar teacher says, when talking about the Beatles,
it all comes back to the Beatles.
He says
first time you mentioned them.
I know, I saved it. He says some people just get more than other people. And you look at those 4 people and they got a lot.
Right.
And I've always felt that way about Gail. She falls out of bed, has a cup of coffee and says, I'm going to go do stand-up. And she does it. And then she says, I think I'm going to be on a TV show in England with some people who are going to be really big stars in a few years. And boom, she does it. And she got a lot. So, yeah, that's it. Yeah.
It came right to you.
That's very sweet.
Should I leave the room now while you talk about me?
Well, it was actually just a few years ago when I was with John down in Atlanta. And I, for the most part, didn't participate or go see him in the work arena. So I was in Atlanta watching him, and I was sitting in the other part of the room, and a call from an actor came in who was having a little bit of a meltdown. And I just saw John sit there and kind of what I would call take it, and just received this tirade, this upset, this pointing fingers, looking for something to fault, blah, blah, blah. And the only thing John said at the end of the conversation was, how can I help you?
Yes.
And I was gobsmacked. This is 40 years into his career, gobsmacked by his incredible resilience, integrity, and compassion and calm in the storm. And a wonderful father.
An amazing father. Over the years, when I've watched John deal with the girls, many tears in my eyes, because you always put them first and you showed them so much love.
Oh, thank you.
John and Gail, thank you so much for joining us on the Writers Hangout.
Well, thank you for asking us, and it's been informative.
Yeah.
And,
A trip down memory lane.
Just to say a goodbye to all your writers who are listening. Writers write. And whether you're on strike, whether you're working, it doesn't matter. You write. And you have to write, and you have to keep writing. And what I see a lot in Hollywood is people who want to be writers but really haven't written very much. And the cream rises, and it always will. And the only way you get to become cream is if you write. So, guys and gals out there, keep writing.
That's a wrap for the Writers Hangout. Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe, like, and thrive. Till we get to hang out again, keep writing. The world needs your stories. The Writers Hangout is sponsored by the Page International Screenwriting Awards. Executive producer, Kristen O'Verne. Producers, Terry Sampson and Sandy Adamitis. Music by Ethan Stoller.